Hi, everyone. So my name is Caitlyn Self, and I'm going to be discussing Chapter 4 of Learning in Context. So there are 6 big ideas from Chapter 4. Learners' behaviors and cognitive processes are influenced by the specific stimuli and consequences in their immediate environment. Learners co-construct their knowledge with individuals whose abilities are similar to or greater than their own. The cultural, societal, and technological context in which learners grow up also influence their behaviors and cognitive processes, as do the academic domains that learners study in school and elsewhere. Although various environmental contexts influence learners and their development, so too do learners influence the environments in which they live and grow. Effective teachers create a classroom environment that encourages and supports productive behaviors and ways of thinking. And effective teachers adapt instruction to the broader cultural and socioeconomic context in which students live. So section 4.1 is immediate stimuli as context. So learners' behaviors are influenced by what goes on around them. So learners learn from obviously not what only happens to themselves, but also the consequences of their peers' actions. And through looking at what happens to themselves and what happens to their peers, learners acquire behaviors to avoid unpleasant consequences, or they acquire behaviors that receive pleasant reinforcing consequences. So what we're referring to here is operant conditioning. It's a behavior followed by a positive reinforcer is more likely to occur again. So what is a reinforcer? So there's 2 different kinds of reinforcers. There's the primary reinforcer, which is the reinforcers that serve basic biological or psychological needs. This is food, water, warmth, physical affection, attention. So the other one is secondary enforcers, which don't satisfy needs. These are things that just make you feel good. They can be money, praise, good grades, trophies, stickers, a smiley face besides your good grade, anything that just, makes you feel good, but doesn't necessarily obviously serve a biological or psychological need. So we have the term of positive reinforcers. So that's just anything that occurs after a behavior that is likely to increase that behavior in the future. So what that is a student studies really hard and gets a good A and receives praise for that good A. So that becomes a positive reinforcer because now they are more likely to study really hard to get an A in the future because they know that A comes with praise. However, not all positive reinforcers are positive. So for instance, a child who wants attention is likely to act out because they know that when they act out, the teacher is going to give them attention in some form or another, usually probably in the form of scolding. And while scolding is not a positive action, because it gives them the attention that they want, that becomes a positive reinforcer, meaning that they're more likely to act out again in the future because they are going to receive attention. So section 4.2 is social interaction as context. So learners often co-construct information with those who are more knowledgeable or of similar knowledge levels. So for those who are more knowledgeable, this often comes in the form of adults mediating learning for children. This helps children form ideas and knowledge from experiences or information. This allows the learner to attach labels, recognize concepts, understand the underlying principles, and draw inferences and conclusions from the experience or information. Learners often also will co-regulate with their peers. So these are the ones that are on similar knowledge levels. So while unlike adults, their peers may not be more knowledgeable than them, working with their peers allows learners to distribute cognition, which is spread the learning task over multiple minds to draw on multiple knowledge bases and ideas. So this is where we get the idea that two heads is better than one. When you have, more than one person, two or more, you have multiple people trying to figure out a problem. And this leads to lots of different ideas, lots of background knowledge, different experience to draw on in order to solve a problem. So co-constructing with peers is especially beneficial as it helps learners how to learn how to justify and explain their reasoning. They get exposed to differing viewpoints, and they are able to find flaws and inconsistencies with their own viewpoints, which obviously would have never been pointed out if they have only tried to work by themselves. So 4.3 is culture, society, and technology as context. Obviously, we know every generation grows up with a different culture, society, and technology around them. And we can see how that affects how they learn and how they behave and, all of these other things. So culture as a context probably is the most basic fundamental things that make a person who they are. So every culture encourages some behaviors and discourages others. They're going to encourage sharing. They're going to discourage taking away someone else's stuff. And a lot of cultures have a lot of the same basic beliefs in, good and bad behaviors, but also some cultures have more emphasis on some things than others. For instance, some cultures may emphasize that you may make eye contact with someone that you're talking to or listening to as a way to show that I'm paying attention to you, I respect what you and what you're saying, versus other cultures may say, you don't make eye contact with your superiors, and that's going to all come into play whenever they're in the classroom. Another thing is that every culture instills worldviews that colors one's interpretations of events. This just means that based on your culture, you're going to have different biases towards and against different things. And not necessarily that those biases are bad, but we do have to recognize that everyone from different cultural backgrounds are going to view different situations very differently based on their worldviews. And every culture has certain ways of doing things. And I have a list of things, examples to consider as far as, different ways of doing things. Some cultures have emphasis on individual success versus others have an emphasis on group success. So in some cultures, everyone's trying to get ahead, everyone's trying to be, number one, and this leads to a lot of competitiveness. However, if we're focusing on group efforts, no one gets left behind, everyone rises up together, everyone understands at the same level and helps the ones who don't understand. And it's going to play a role in how they interact in a classroom. People who have a group focus are not going to perform well in a classroom who focuses on individual efforts, who posts, the best paper and all this other things. It's going to make the people who have group focus, group orientation, feel very left out and not a part of the learning environment. Another thing is eye contact and personal space. Every culture has their own rules for how they do this. Some people, some cultures say, oh, you can't be within a certain distance from anyone except for family. You don't make eye contact with your superiors or your elders. And so this is also going to come into play whenever you put people into group work. If they require a lot of space away from other people, group work in a small, corner of the classroom isn't going to be very good for them. or the same for demanding eye contact during a lecture. Just because someone's not making eye contact doesn't mean they're not paying attention. Another thing is family relationships and expectations. This comes in the form of some cultures, obviously education is the most important thing. You go to all, K through 12, and then you go on to get, your bachelor's, master's, doctorate, and so on. However, in other cultures, they have, while education is still important, a lot of them have different expectations for how the students are going to contribute to the family. Sometimes that means that students have to get jobs to support the family. Sometimes that means that students have to go to work with the parents, say, working fields, or, if parents have their own businesses, they're going to go work at their parents' business and such. Others, an example used in the book is that in some African families, even though a woman who has not yet finished high school gets pregnant, she is likely to not continue school, but it's still cause for celebration, because for them and their culture, it is held in high esteem to start a family, to be a mother. And so that takes their priority over education. Next is society as a context. So a society influences its members' learning in a variety of ways through the resources it provides, the activities it supports, and the general messages it communicates. Any large society has multiple layers that all affect children's learning and development directly and indirectly. At the bottom of the slide here, I've put in a little table from our textbook, and it just shows how everything interacts, and all of it leads back to interacting with the individual. So the individual and family, the family and social groups, and the social groups and the individual, and it just keeps going for our communities and societies and how they all interact. The next thing is that different members of societies have different specialties, and they call on one another's areas of expertise as needed. One of the best ways to think about this is quite literally just your jobs. Some people are teachers, some people are cops and firefighters, other people's are doctors and lawyers, and each person has their place in society and their set of expertise, and everyone helps each other as needed. And unfortunately, in most situations, some society members have greater access to society's resources than other members do. And this is their socioeconomic status. If we think in the terms of income, high income families are going to have a lot more access to the resources they need to get a good education than those from low income families. And obviously that affects how well they're able to get their education. Finally, technology as a context. Mobile devices, that's your cell phones, your laptops, your tablets, your TVs, all of these things allow learners to connect to a wide variety of people and resources. In a social context, mobile devices allow learners to initiate and maintain friendships. And in the classroom, mobile devices allow for the access of distributed knowledge, such as facts and data. This is accessing all of the information that the internet has. Everything is practically one Google search away. And on the downside, that means that it allows for misinformation and also for distractions to learning and studying. One Google search away could lead you to someone's auntie's Facebook post about how apples are poisonous. And unless you ever cross-reference that might be your viewpoint from now on, that apples are poisonous. And whenever you're trying to sit here and study, if you have your phone lighting up beside you with notifications, that's going to cause a distraction. That's going to cause a hindrance to your learning because you're not retaining the information because you're distracted. So the next one, 4.4, is how learners modify their environment. So learners alter their current environment through both their behaviors and internal variables, such as beliefs, mental processes, feelings, and personality traits. This is what is referred to as reciprocal causation. It's a mutual cause and effect relationship among environment, behavior, and personal variables, as these three factors influence learning and development. So what that means is, if we look at the little chart on the left, everything interacts with each other. Internal variables interact with both environment and behavior. Environment interacts with both internal variables and behavior. And on the right here, I've recreated a table from our book because the table from our book was just a little too big to fit into the slide, about how everything interacts. So environment and behavior. The effect of environment on behavior is that reinforcement and punishment affect future behavior. The effect of environment on internal variables is feedback from others affects the learner's expectations about future performance. So I'm not going to go through the rest of them. If you'd like to, you can pause the video so that you can read through this. But it's just showing how everything interacts with each other in the ways of learning and development. So for section 4.5 is providing supportive context for learning. What this means is that us as teachers are encouraging productive behaviors. And of course, we can do that through a number of ways. The first way is create conditions that elicit the desired responses. That means we're creating a classroom environment where these our expectations for certain behaviors are being met. Now we can do this by creating an environment where everyone feels accepted and respected, because when everyone feels like they belong and that they are respected for their viewpoints and their differences and their likenesses, and they're accepted for those, when everyone feels like they belong, everyone is much more likely to do better and be willing to be their best selves. Another way to do this is by using cues. These can be verbal or nonverbal. They let your students know that a certain behavior is expected or should stop, such as when you ring a bell, everyone stops what they're doing and gives you their attention. Or if you shut the light off, that means that they're talking too loud and they need to lower their voices. And so it's just creating certain cues for how behaviors are managed in your classroom. And that will create the conditions that allows for positive behaviors to occur. The next thing is to make sure that productive behaviors are reinforced and non-productive behaviors aren't reinforced. So we want to make sure to regularly reinforce good behaviors. And it sounds backwards, but you want to catch students being good. You want to reward them for the things that they're doing good, such as, sitting down and reading quietly instead of talking to their friends. You always want to be rewarding the good behaviors so that they're more likely to occur than the bad behaviors. You want to make sure that your response contingencies are clear. What this means is that you want to make sure your students know why they are being rewarded or receiving the reinforcement. So you want to, rather than just giving a kid a sticker and they're going to say like, hey, I have no idea why I got this, but cool. What you want to say is, hey, you did a really good job, picking up all the class materials. So here's a sticker for being a good helper. So that's just going to make sure they understand why the behavior or why they are receiving the reinforcement for the behavior. They're going to say, oh, this behavior was good. This is the certain thing that my teacher wants to see, so I'm going to continue doing that. The other thing is to reinforce productive behaviors that are incompatible with non-productive productive ones instead of punishment. So basically, we want to reinforce behaviors that we want instead of punishing behaviors that we don't want. So say we have a hyperactive student, instead of always yelling at the student to go sit down, stop wandering around the classroom, stop talking to your classmates, we're going to reward them when they do the things we want. So when they're sitting down, we're going to give them a sticker or, whatever reinforcement we want to use. And once they have established the behavior of sitting down, next we take it a step further. They're sitting down and doing the assignment that they're supposed to. And we just build on that behavior. We start at the minimum and we build the scaffolding of producing the grand good behavior that we want to see. And the last thing is that we model desired behaviors. We have to make sure that we're being role models, because we all know that if we try to say, here's rules number 1, 2, and 3, and we don't do them, the children are going to say, why do we have to do them if you're not doing them? So if we say, no, using inside voices, we have to make sure we're not yelling. If we say no wadding up, paper balls and throwing them at the trash can playing basketball, we have to make sure we're not doing that ourselves too. So basically, we're setting the stage, setting the standards for the students. And the last one is taking students' broader cultural and socioeconomic context into account. So the number one thing to remember in this section is that we are advocates for students. That's what we are first and foremost as teachers. So all of this is going to revolve around that. So the first thing to do is to learn as much about your students' cultural backgrounds and to come to grips with your own cultural lenses. Now, what this means is that we want to say, whenever we're preparing for the next semester, we want to know everything about our students that we possibly can. Do they have different cultural backgrounds? And how will that come into play into our classrooms? And we want to know everything we can so that we can be supportive of that and knowledgeable. And then for the come to grips with our own cultural lenses, that means to make sure that we see how our biases, what our biases are, and to make sure that they don't come into play. Whether they're good or bad, we cannot have bias when looking at and dealing with students. The next thing is to remember that membership in a particular culture or ethnic group isn't an either or situation, it's a more or less situation. So it's not your Native American or your European American. It's the fact that a Native American child who was not raised in a Native American family, who was raised by European Americans, is going to be of European American culture, not Native American culture. But it's also the fact that when, say, if we're talking in the terms of immigrants, when people come here, some, throw away all of their old ways and are ready to accept and take in as much new ways as possible. They're not going to be from the cultural background. Well, they are from that cultural background, but they are now from the cultural background of everything that they've, absorbed. So we can't say just because someone came from a certain country that that's going to be their culture. We have to understand that everyone is different. Everyone has their own degrees of their cultural background. The next thing is to incorporate the perspectives and traditions of many cultures into the curriculum. So we want to make sure that everyone feels included. So whenever we are So you can do it for every subject. So for history, when you're looking at American history, we're not just looking at it through the eyes of the colonists, we're also looking at it from the view of the Native Americans and how they were affected. And if we're looking at English, when we go over poetry, we can look at rap and hip hop because those are, the African American culture, and that is something they're going to relate to. And they are obviously very relevant to English. And every culture can be incorporated in some way. And the main idea is that we are making everyone feel interested and accepted and seen and heard. Because when everyone feels like it's just one viewpoint, they're going to tune out, they don't care, they're not interested. But whenever they and their culture is present in the curriculum, they're going to be obviously much more interested and willing to learn. The next thing is to be sensitive to cultural differences in behaviors and beliefs, and when appropriate, adapt instructional methods to the students' preferred ways of learning. We cannot have a classroom based on individual success, who's number one, whenever we have a bunch of students who culturally focus on group efforts. It won't work. They're not going to learn in an effective manner. So we're going to have to adapt our teaching methods to be around those of our students. The next thing is work hard to break down rigid stereotypes and cultural ethnic groups, stereotypes of cultural ethnic groups. So once again, just being an advocate for the students. And finally, identify and, if possible, provide missing resources and experiences important for successful learning. Sorry. This comes with a lot of times lower income families where they don't have access to school supplies and clothes and food, and the list goes on. And that's just being an advocate for them, getting the families in touch with the governmental services that they need in order to get their next meal, get the school supplies that they need, and just obviously being there for the students and make sure that they have everything that they possibly can to have a successful learning experience. So finally, the summary. So this is just kind of an overview of all 6 parts of the chapter. Again, hitting those big ideas. So the first, learners' behaviors are influenced by what goes on around them. Learners co-construct their knowledge with adults and peers. 2 heads are better than 1. The cultural, societal, and technological context in which learners grow up also influence their behaviors and cognitive processes. Although various environmental contexts influence learners and their development, learners also influence their environment. Effective teachers create a classroom environment that encourages and supports productive behaviors and ways of thinking. And effective teachers adapt instruction to the broader cultural and socioeconomic context in which students live. So that's the summary. That's all I've got. So thank you for your time, and I hope you learned something.